Hey guys, what's going on? This is episode number 18 of Cinepile, the podcast that talks about films that matter. Rather, we discuss. We don't just talk about, we discuss.
Or debate.
Or debate.
We had a debate a couple episodes ago.
That we did. We had a debate last episode with Good Time, a little bit with me.
It wasn't much of a debate.
Yeah, I capitulated a lot.
Actually, I just want to make a point real quick. 18 is my lucky number.
That's true, it is.
It is my lucky number. I always had 18 as my jersey numbers in sports. Mm-hmm. And I still hold it has a special sentiment to my heart.
A certain je ne sais quoi, as the French would say.
Sure.
Sure. Well, like I was saying, this is episode number 18, and today we are going to be discussing a film that is historical in a genre, that is potentially significant for the future of cinema, and is handled by one of my favorite directors that is a powerhouse within Hollywood, and that is Blade Runner 2049.
What do you want? I want to ask you some questions. The key to the future is finally unearthed. Bring it to me. They know you're here.
I always told you, you're special. Your story isn't over yet. There's still a page left.
And we're going to be talking about just how great that movie is, or really our perspectives on it. And before we get much further, let's pump the brakes a little bit because they're doing something a little bit different.
Yes, we are.
So, number one, Cinepile is going to be cranking out a little bit more content, more than usual. So be prepared for some more episodes every single Friday. So if you have a subscription to us, know that in your inbox at 8 a.m. on Fridays, we're going to be in there with you on your morning commute.
Just think, when you have a new movie coming out, we're also coming out at the same time, every
We're
Friday.
there with you. Good morning. But also a little bit different, we are not with Kyle today because of time dilation, as he is in Prague, as our last episode covered. We are here with Nicholas T. Gibson. Nicholas, say hello.
Hello.
Nick is our short and brief. So Nick is our newest roommate here at the Waterford Palace and is going to be giving his 2 cents also with Blade Runner. But enough talking. Let's dive into it. Blade Runner 2049, directed by Denis Villeneuve, and then with the director of photography.
I still don't know how to pronounce it. Is that
it's
what it is?
Villeneuve.
It's for sure Denis, obviously, but then it's Villeneuve.
I feel like it's
Villeneuve. Villeneuve.
I feel like the more I say it, the more I don't understand it.
I don't know. I feel ashamed that
how
I don't know how to pronounce his name, to be honest.
about Denis, new to the village? Because that's what his last name means. It means that you're new to a village.
Denis, new to the village.
So Denis, new to the village,
is crushing it right now. Like you said, he's a powerhouse.
He's crushing it.
Honestly probably he's for sure in his prime right now.
Oh,
and he's being respected.
Oh, and
in Hollywood,
and he's handling titles that are coveted, a part of cinema legacy. Not only with Blade Runner, but what's his next film? Oh, Dune.
Yeah.
And it's he can handle new films. He can handle films that already have an established cult classic audience, and then also be as inventive as he was with Arrival.
It's so interesting that he's landed on sci-fi. I love that.
More interesting is he was also a documentarian beforehand.
I mean, I believe that.
And he was. I just watched an interview with him, and he was saying that the reason why he likes sci-fi is because of the. He was saying that he loved the fact that within documentary there was chaos ordered on the lens, and that's what he likes about sci-fi, is because it also allows you to kind of get deeper into the human experience and allows for something that's existential to be dealt with.
You're right. Sci-fi naturally is one of the more symbolic, societal, like symbolically, like where we are and where we're headed.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have a big playground. You can do it. You can tackle so many different things.
It's like the two of the biggest genres for that. I think sci-fi is the biggest for that. The second is like horror is the second biggest one talking about society, but that one's usually tongue-in-cheek in a way. This one is sci-fi is usually serious. That was great. Oh, okay, so documentarian, that's interesting. And I can see that because what was his first couple films? He did Polytechnique, which was a real-ish reenactment of
A school
the
shooting.
school shooting in Polytechnique. Then he had, now while this is not a nonfiction, Incendies was very like viscerally real feeling.
Right.
And we actually, I mean, I'm sure if you guys are listening to us now, hopefully you've listened to a few of our previous episodes. And we have an episode dedicated to Denis. And we talk a lot about his previous films.
But we're talking about specifically what he did with Blade Runner. And Blade Runner 2049, he tackles, what would be a cult classic where, like, he said that he would expect the audience to come in with bats and he would join them because he knew that he was handling something precious. In that Blade Runner in itself established the sci-fi genre. If you've seen Fifth Element, if you've seen Minority Report, if you've seen anything with a flying car or, any kind of dystopic future, Blade Runner is integral to that. It is the seed that grew what we now consider modern sci-fi. So when he took it, he actually said, oh shit, like I have this now. And after he read the script, he was just like, I would love to do this. This is such a dynamite. You have that coupled with Roger Deakins and Denis, who's just been knocking out of the park, especially in the sci-fi genre. And you got a cocktail that I'm going to drink happily.
I'm not going to lie, I didn't know that Scott was supposed to direct
Scott
this,
was originally
and
supposed to do it, but Prometheus
I'm really
took him away.
glad he didn't.
Yep.
And nothing against Ridley Scott, but I don't think he would have handled this nearly as well as Denis did.
No, I think it's kind of you almost get tunnel vision with some directors and having a new perspective and a new idea on how to display it. And he told Denis, this is yours. He was like, don't remake what I did. But Denis had such high respect for him, he obviously wanted to pay homage to the previous film, but did it with his own Denis spin.
Because I think that's what Ridley Scott would have done. I think he
would
have.
He stayed safe.
He would have done. He wouldn't have reached out and made a new film. He would have made his old film today. I think. Which is just, it's natural too because it was his baby before.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I feel like it would almost Hobbit syndrome. Can we quote that now? Can that be a thing? Hobbit syndrome. But before we talk about more about directors and everything like that, what did you in general take away from it? What was something that you liked about? We can say, oh, it's a great movie, but what specifically? What were some things that jumped out at you from score to cinematography, editing? What?
Everyone knows this, but Roger Deakins is a beast. Mm-hmm. That dude knows how to shoot film. He knows how to, and honestly, this was really cool to see him doing a sci-fi like this. I mean, it's not his first sci-fi, but
yeah,
this modern epic sci-fi, he did some interesting lighting in a lot of these scenes. A lot of moving lights, a lot of colored lights. When, different scenes, obviously you can go to the Las Vegas scene or a whole chapter or whatever you want to call it. And
I thought the talking about what is his theme, Roger Deakins, with his Vegas lookalike, it also reminded me of the most recent James Bond when it was that super, super red hyper tungsten kind of look where I was that no one can accomplish that look like Deakins can. But yeah, I didn't want to take away what you're saying. But
no, you're not taking it anyway. This is my takeaway. Well, I've got several takeaways from Blade Runner actually, but when I think in the future, if I'm not thinking symbolically or philosophically about this film, what I will remember Blade Runner for is the visuals and the cinematography.
For sure.
The score, fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I love it.
It was so grandiose. It had just incredible it was subtle but bass and
sweeping.
It was sweeping, but it wasn't like
Distracting either.
It wasn't really melodic necessarily. Mm-hmm. It wasn't like a song that they were playing for you.
No, it was just woven right in with the shots. Just
Yeah, for sure. And like that, I think, because honestly, when I think of Blade Runner, I think of the matte paintings from the original. I think of the synthesizers that were stretched to like their very nth degree. The moody noirness and the willingness to show the world that they live in. And so they do such a great job of just this inhale, exhale between world and individual, and how they both play off each other. And when you can actually take that world scientifically, sci-fi wise, and make it into a character, it's so great. So to say, like what I call a hallway sci-fi, I think is something like that Matt Damon film where he had the exoskeleton was going around, like it was
Elysium.
Elysium. I was like, it's the Greek.
I never saw Elysium.
I was like, it's like the Greek heaven. I forgot what it was, but yeah, Elysium, to where it's just like, it's a guy in a hallway, a guy in another like hallway that's white, and another guy in a hallway that's white. Even Oblivion with Tom Cruise, it was that's like a hallway sci-fi, to where it was just like it didn't really have this world atmospheric societal thing. Like there wasn't a character. They were to the world that they lived in.
They were hiding the world
exactly
because they couldn't show it.
Yeah, they couldn't handle it. It didn't have character.
This one almost didn't have enough time to show you the world they wanted to show you.
I felt like I was in the world the whole time.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there was times where I actually forgot the actors while they were talking because I was so blown away. I mean, say what you will. People on the mass scales maybe thought that some scenes were too slow. They thought that 2 hours and 40 minutes was too much time to devote to a film. But regardless, it was a dessert for the eyes. Every single shot was beautiful and masterfully done.
I think they needed that time. I know in this, like, I had a discussion with someone at my work, and they thought the movie was too long. And it's like, man, it's like, obviously when you talk about these things, it's like, it's obviously a point of opinion if a movie's too long. If you think it's too long, it's because you're not enjoying yourself and you feel like it's too long. You're looking at your watch being, oh, this is too long. But if you're enjoying, like, what you're, the cinematography, or you're enjoying the story or the philosophy that's being shown or the world building, man, it almost wasn't long enough.
No, yeah.
Yeah, when it was getting towards the end, it was just like, oh, man.
Yeah, it was honestly...
Just keep going.
Yeah, it was honestly like a buffet. Like, I would eat till I exploded in terms of that movie, because there's so much content and richness to it, and there's so many varied stories. And I think that's why. It's because it's so big, you feel like this world has more stories to tell, that these characters have such interesting, full lives that that they can go beyond the screen.
Like, you literally could have just, like, while you're in the street, like, while it's a scene that they're just, he's eating lunch or whatever, and you're, like, in this really busy, like, just chaos, and you feel like you could just take a left, and there's a whole story that you could just, like...
Well, let's talk about that real quick. So Ryan Gosling is eating lunch at this, whatever, let's call it a pavilion or plaza at the moment. They could have just kept with him. But kind of talking about Children of Men real quick. Children of Men was brave enough to take a left and right around its characters to show the environment. In that scene, it took a left, and if you remember, it was a whole bunch of screens screaming out like, ramen instant noodles, Diet Coke this, blah, 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 with like these neon colors, and just these people, they weren't ordering. They were, flailing at these
smashing these buttons.
At these screens to just get this food to come down. Like, they were like these machines, and he's just like this tepid, calm, cool character.
Some of them probably were machines.
Probably could have been, and like, but that's what, like, the importance of having that world is. It allows it to contrast against your character, and it allows for something that acts as a soundboard for your character to have more of a size. And I think a lot of modern cinema had lost that, but then Denis was like, not here, brother. He's like, I'm gonna bring it back, and that was one of the things that I loved. But Nick, what were some of the kind of things that sort of like shot out at you in terms of just like cinematography or anything? Like, when you thought about it, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think Blade Runner 2049?
One, just the visuals.
Yeah.
Right off the bat, and
sure.
the sound, all of it, because pretty much every aspect of it, the emotions that it invoked, the shots that it took. Basically, I'm just adding on to what you guys said. The moving lights, just all of it.
The CG was actually
solid.
impressive because it never felt fake to me.
Nope.
And like, obviously, a huge chunk of this film is just pure CG. When you go from the cities, they even have the recreated, I forgot her name, from the previous Blade Runner, the android.
Rachel.
Rachel, thank you, Rachel.
Rachel, yeah.
The recreated Rachel looked
Flawless.
totally real.
Like, I mean, I was leaning forward, squinting, and I was just like, did they find her daughter or what's going on? And I was like, is this? So my thought is that they must have found a real person, you know, that was very, very similar to Rachel, probably makeup her up, you know, some prostheses, and did a lot of physical effect, and then built on that with CGI.
Absolutely.
I would love to see how they did that.
But just remember back not too long before this with Star Wars when they did it with Carrie Fisher. When she was younger, when they went back to the beginning of New Hope and they showed her. I mean, she didn't look bad, but you could tell it was CG.
Right.
This you couldn't really tell was CG.
No, this was like a whole nother new, like, the Uncanny Valley. It didn't know. Like, I saw it as a real person.
Yeah, and I don't want to just like hark on this one thing of CG because that's how the whole movie was. It was just nothing felt really fake. If anything felt fake, and I'm not even saying it felt fake, but the most fake thing was maybe the bees. And that was like such a inconsequential. Well, I just meant like CG wise, like it's such an inconsequential. And we can talk about the bees later of what symbolically maybe that represents. But yeah, everything, it still felt like the original Blade Runner where it was all practical.
Everything
this
melted.
still felt real, which is amazing.
Yeah.
Well, and then I was listening to an interview that Denis did with Google with like their
Denis,
sorry, Denis New Village, that Denis had with a bunch of like Google like AI developers and everything like that, and he was talking about how he really does despise the green screen phenomena that, you know, the kind of comic book films have like brought into such, you know, in vogue kind of methods. Because he says that an actor has to focus on the external and has to imagine what they're within rather than focusing on their character and internalizing. And so that's why, like, for the Vegas shooting and everything like that, that was all practical. That was all real. He said that he constantly endeavored to have real sets, to have that your imagination's supposed to take place, not the actors. And that's what gives authentic performances. And I was just like,
that's awesome.
I love Denis New Village so much.
He's great.
He gets it. He actually gets it.
He's definitely one of my favorite directors right now.
Hands down.
Honestly, I'm trying to think of, and I'm a guy that I don't think I can ever make a concrete list of things. Mm-hmm. Everything is too in flux. He's in my top 3. Okay. For sure. In my top 3 right now of active directors.
Yeah.
There was one more thing I wanted to say about hot takes. I have a really good hot take, and this is more of maybe a logistical hot take.
Okay.
If that's the right word for
I
this.
guess.
IMAX. So I've seen this film twice. I saw regular theater, 2D, and I saw IMAX 2D. Don't see this fucking shit 3D. Don't see anything 3D. Unless it was shot 3D, then you could see it 3D. But the interesting thing about the IMAX is that it actually... Let me preface this real quick. So when I saw it the second time in IMAX, and if you don't know, IMAX screens are really big and they're really tall. That's one of the big things about IMAX is they're taller than a normal screen. Mm-hmm. And so when someone shoots IMAX, mostly the image just gets much, much taller. So it's more of a square aspect ratio than really wide. And when this movie started playing, I noticed that it stretched almost to the top and bottom. And I was like, wait, how did they do that? How is this reaching the screen? Did they punch in? Did they like crop off the edge? Did they like blow it up and then crop off the edges? Because it went from a wide aspect ratio to a much more narrow one, but just huge. And then I had, it confused me at first. And then I researched it and found out that no, they actually just shot more than what they show in the theatrical release. So if you see it in IMAX, which sadly it's already out of IMAX, they had to get rid of it
for Geostorm.
For fucking Geostorm.
Hey,
Jesus.
That looks like an amazing movie.
Get out of here, dude. I forgive you. No, but they actually shot it with, I think they said it's like 25% more picture, top and bottom.
Oh,
It just
wow.
goes up and down. And that was the IMAX. So you only got to see that if you saw IMAX. And so they actually did a lot more work in the film than you see theatrically because all the CG, everything has to actually go that much
Right, right.
further.
That's crazy.
That's really
And it's
cool.
yeah, it's I think 4K or it's like super high def. It looks super sharp.
So would you say like that when it comes to like Blade Runner 2049, did it do something different? Like, can it be? Do you think it'll have such a seedling kind of effect that the original Blade Runner had?
I kind of think it is. And it's hard for me to put my thumb exactly on what it is, but I think this was in an age of we're so heavily like already bombarded with heavy CG films. So it's not like we haven't seen heavy CG before.
Yeah.
But the way they did this, and there's multiple fronts we could talk about this, but as far as like visually what they made, I think this was the modern version of the 82 Blade Runner in a sense of pushing the boundaries of sci-fi.
Yeah, because I mean, I would say for the CGI almost, and then just like I don't know, I don't want to say like necessarily the storytelling, but showing that again that philosophy and that getting into like a deeper meaning of trying to explore something with the art of film can still be done. And
That's the most important thing.
And I thought like it did. It was like it was in the flotsam of jetsam of just terrible movies that are just kind of really just plugging like movie theaters now. It was like this light in like the darkness. Not to be so dramatic,
No,
but
I
it was just like
understand.
it was like just such an excellent movie, and it showed that great movies can still be made. You just have to give a crap about it.
Because what was the first one about? The first one was mainly about, or if we were going to just like put it down to like one sentence,
Yeah.
it's like, what is it possible to have robots and have them be human? Can they still be conscious at all? And can they have feelings and have agency and decide what they want to do? That was the first one. And you kind of end with, yes, they can.
Mm-hmm.
They are people.
Depends on what ending you're watching.
Sure. I don't think all in. Like, I think you still can come to that conclusion.
For sure you
regardless.
can.
And this one, it just picks up where it left off and goes further with it.
Right.
It's like, okay, you think that robots? Sure, robots are human. They can be people. What about a hologram? Can that be a person? Can this have consciousness? And so it just took it. I feel like this movie, it just as before we get too deep philosophically,
Right.
just talking about where this stands as far as sci-fi, and is it the next torchbearer? Is it the new bar that's set for modern sci-fi?
I think Blade Runner 100% can carry a torch because of the meditative approach that like Denis takes toward it, or Denis takes toward it, that he evolved not only the CGI, he evolved the approach. And I think specifically the approach is where I really want to get at, and I think is really what Cinephile is more so about, is the, what was he trying to do with Blade Runner 2049?
What do you mean by approach?
The approach of, this could have been a stupid action film. This could have focused...
Honestly, I think that's probably... I'm going to get rid of the word stupid, but I think if Scott had directed this, it would have been an action film.
To get back to my point, so the approach. That it could have been a simple, Ryan Gosling leaping from building to building, shooting his gun and, left in the hands of a different kind of director with a different kind of goal. It could have been a very simple, I guess obtuse, you could kind of say, film that didn't try to do it. But Denis, I think with his, Denis-ness, I think that we can kind of call now, as I think he's for sure an auteur at this point, he wanted to explore more onto the human condition. He wanted to explore onto what makes an individual. He wanted to explore on, where does sentience begin and where does it?
Yeah. I wanted to interject real quick.
Okay.
I shouldn't even say interject. I wanted to add to what you're saying, is that what is a better genre to talk about these things you just said, about the human condition, about philosophy, than sci-fi?
I don't think
And
there
yet,
is one.
I feel like it isn't being utilized necessarily in the sci-fi that we see. Sci-fi has kind of recently, and maybe I'm just being blinded by my bias or something. Maybe I'm not actually seeing what I should be seeing, but I feel like sci-fi recently has been kind of hijacked by the action thriller or something. It's become more of an action thing, when really it is the best genre apt to be discussing hugely important social, philosophical problems we have.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
that's why I think that this film, not only what I said originally is that it's, visually, it maybe technically could be the next 1982 Blade Runner, the modern version, but philosophically and just discussion-wise can be the new Blade Runner. And it could be the new bar for sci-fi.
For sure, because I think this is one of those movies that you need 2-3 times to get something from it.
Yeah. The just the issues that it tackles. Just exactly that. What it
It's a fiendishly hard thing to talk about when we're talking about these philosophical problems, and that is what's important. When a film can help you think about these issues, it's a tool for thinking, Like film can be a tool for thinking and a gateway to new ideas.
It helps you gain new perspective.
Exactly. And sci-fi, I think, is such an integral, and it can be looked at as silly, like people can look at Star Trek as silly, but you guys especially know that Star Trek isn't very silly.
No.
Like, yes, there's some tongue-in-cheek, there's some
Of course.
campiness to it. You can go back and find anything that's campy. But it's, like, genuinely important for discourse. And is trying to push the boundaries of, like, philosophical thought.
Well, and I think
to the broad public.
and
That's the important part.
And I think the thing is with that is how you said boundary, and there's only boundary with progress. And I think that's why sci-fi always can don the cape of, kind of posing philosophical questions in the fact of, okay, within progression, what then happens? Because if your society is moving forward in time, other ideals have to move forward. Okay, is it utilitarianism? Is it the needs of the many outweighing the needs of the few? Is it 1984, kind of communist regime or thought police? It asks, what else evolves with you? And it's like, it's essentially it's a thought experiment on the screen.
It's exactly that. It's a mirror, but it's also like,
it's an objective mirror.
it can be a wacky mirror. It can be a funhouse mirror. It can be, like you can make it whichever way you want, but it's meant to reflect on society.
Right.
And it's meant to make you think about where we are now and what we will become.
Right. And I would like to kind of open the Pandora's box that is, Blade Runner and the philosophy that it digs into. Let's talk about joy.
Ooh, we're going to hot takes 2.0.
We're going to go to
now.
Hot Takes 2.0.
A little bit of a deeper dive.
A little bit of a deeper dive. So, as a recap, let's remember that Joy is essentially a marionette puppet in so many respects, that she is a hologram that is affixed to Ryan Gosling's or Kay's character's ceiling, and her entire existence is really just to keep him company in a very big and lonely city.
I really like
And
the marionette puppet imagery.
I literally just thought of it as that she was a marionette puppet that got her strings cut.
I'm offended you call her a puppet because I didn't see her as a puppet.
No.
I know what
you mean.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just literally from the seat. Like, that's a really good imagery, and it's like really good imagery because it's like, okay, and this goes back to what I was saying before with Joy and like, okay, yeah, we're normal robots. These you totally think that they're conscious and they're people. Okay, well, what about Joy? the fact that she's a marionette puppet. In a visual sense, she's a marionette puppet, but maybe more in a technical sense when we talk about she's quite literally ones and zeros. They even have that little blurb in the film when I guess they reveal that replicants actually have DNA, or they still use like the same as humans, A, T, C, and G.
Gattaca.
Gattaca, yeah, great film, Gattaca. Yeah. And she was like, "Oh, I'm just ones and zeros." So she's quite literally a program, right? Someone wrote her, to some extent. Now, so she is a puppet, you could say, in a way that she is bound by her.
Yeah.
Her ones and zeros.
Yeah,
her programming.
Her AI adaptability is really just to better serve whomever her master is.
Right. She's a product.
And then it's an interesting dynamic because you have Ryan Gosling, this replicant, so a shadow of what we would consider humanity, being accompanied by what he would consider a shadow of himself.
Right.
So like this penumbra,
there's almost
I guess
a
we're at now.
three-tier caste system we got going on now.
Right, exactly. And so it gets into like this kind of, state of, okay, is she real? Does she have consciousness? Does she have sentience? Does she have self-awareness?
Right, and can she have these
Can
things?
she have it within this
And that's a
entire-
philosophical discussion that's a hard one. It's a hard one to have. And I think this, in a similar way that I'm a big fan of Ex Machina, I think Ex Machina did a really good service to this discussion as far as doing a Turing test and you genuinely being like, can this robot have consciousness? Is it actually aware of the things it's doing? Is it, we're hurting it, and does it actually know that it's being hurt or that it's being held captive? It says it does. It appears to know, but can we actually think it does? Does it actually? Are we being duped into thinking that it feels these ways, or does it actually feel these things? And I think Joy is that. They did a good job of showing that, because we've already gotten past the point of, at least in this world, that we already think that Kay has consciousness and has feelings, and we can agree with his action, or like we think he's a person. We almost don't even look at Kay as a replicant.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back to Joy. When did she potentially become an individual? For me, I think symbolically, kind of going to V for Vendetta, if we can totally just for a quick second. When Natalie Portman's character walked, after being tortured by V, and she finally walked out into the rain and was crying, she was baptized, essentially, by the rain into realizing who she was. She finally broke and got to her most basal levels and realized who she was. She had her own identity. Everything was torn asunder. Same thing happened with Joy, that she went outside and she was rained on after being granted freedom, essentially. And I think that was
her strings being cut.
Her strings being cut. She's got no strings to hold her down. And I think that was a big rebirth kind of moment for not only herself physically, but I think also mentally as well. Because now she can see everything. She can take in the world. And if you're an AI system that's supposed to take in the world, interpret it, understand it, and respond to it, and feel from it. That's where you get into emotions and kind of the murkiness of it all. But the beginnings of her as an individual, I think, began at that very moment.
And that's where the real discussion goes is, and just harkening back to what I said just like a couple minutes ago, is does she actually feel those things, or does she only
Feel like she
look
should.
like she feels those things to you?
So yeah.
Is there a distinction between the two?
Right.
Is there a difference?
That's a good question, because to me, like, immediately right off the bat, I immediately didn't think it was an AI. Never was like, that's just an AI.
Like you thought of her like as
person.
a conscious being, even though she was
and then
a hologram.
Yeah, and then when they got the little device, it was more. It kind of seemed like that's something they've been talking about for a long, long time. So, boom, they got it, and then strings are cut. She's free. She goes out into the rain.
And yeah, well, like we were saying, like that she had that baptizing scene. It's like, yeah, she definitely had that baptizing scene. But how long was this coming? Was this just like an epiphany for her? Doubtful. She probably, this was probably...
No, I think that, like, it makes sense that her character, it's like, it's like sands in an hourglass, like it progressively built for sure.
Right, we just never saw it, obviously.
Yeah, obviously we didn't. And I would think, like, secondarily, the next thing that she would do is expressing your own desire, I feel like, is another compliment to sentience. And I feel like her other thing, which you could say is a part of her programming to please Ryan Gosling's character is Kay, was when she made love to Ryan Gosling, which we can talk about the stunning CGI feat that was.
That was great.
And also the fact that she had an outward desire to want to make love to a man that she can't make love to. So it was a desire to want to be human and have a human connection. And I think, again, that was a part of it. And even in her termination later on, she feared for her own mortality. And she lunges for Kay because she realized that life is short. And I think that's the most, she shed her mortal coil. And I think that was the most important part to her. She showed fear that she wasn't going to see Kay anymore. And I don't know what's more human than missing the ones that you love.
Yeah.
And so you get to see this beautiful arc of her in that entire film as well, amongst all the other arcs.
She was honestly probably my favorite part.
Probably
of the film.
favorite part, yeah.
Honestly,
Agreed.
Because that part of the film has to do with that subject of what does it mean to have consciousness, what does it mean to have free will and to be human. And I think they did a really good job of, like Ex Machina, making you feel for this character that you normally shouldn't feel for. Like a normal person shouldn't, like if you had a teddy bear or something, put an emotional investment in. Oh, it's just a toy. It doesn't actually have feelings or something like that. Well, okay. Well, you could almost say Joy is like that. Joy is a product. She is written. But then you see it and it's like, okay, she actually does have feelings or does have ideas and wants and... Oh, and actually we can get to that one of the final scenes when we showed Joy, the big blow up pink purple Joy.
That was a huge
Joy
moment, yeah.
That called him Joe.
Right.
That was a big... I guess it wasn't like super big in the film until this point. I mean, it's kind of big, but it wasn't like a big pronounced moment. But earlier in the film, Joy names Kay Joe, because they believe that he is this transcendent being now. He is the firstborn.
The next step in human evolution.
Yeah, he's the firstborn replicant. Mm-hmm. And born beings deserve to be named. And so she dons the name Joe for him, which is funny because she's Joy and Joe. And then towards the end of the film, it was a big thing for him. He eventually takes on that name when he meets who he thinks is his father, Harrison Ford. And he says, "Oh, I'm Joe." But then later, we see the big, 100-foot tall Joy, pink Joy, and she calls him Joe. She says, "You look like a good Joe."
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it hurts him.
Right.
But this is a really good thing for discussion because it's, okay, so now we know that Joy is predisposed to call people Joe. So when she called him Joe earlier, was she always going to call him Joe? And if so, does it matter? Is it still a genuine thing she did? She naming him Joe, is it still genuine even if it was programmed to be so? And it's a discussion about us. And it's a discussion about free will in general. Of what, are you predisposed to say certain things or think certain ideas or to be certain ways? If we go into really fucking deep stuff, if you're talking about like on the physical level, if you are always, if you believe in fate or determinism or something, not that those two are necessarily the same thing, but if you believe in something like that, is anything you do genuine? And if it is determined, why can't it be genuine? Does it matter? So I think it's an interesting introspection looking at Joy,
Yeah.
especially in that moment. Right when that happened, that's what I thought. When she called him Joe, I thought it was brilliant. And it really made me think.
Yeah, because it gets into the fact of if she has one name in her mind and she names him that one name,
But she doesn't know she has one name in her mind.
But exactly. I mean, what she's drawing on is a one-name vocabulary, but nonetheless, I think it's the action of wanting to name someone, and it was the fact that she was wanting to give him meaning to her as well, and to the world, and to himself. And I again, I thought that was a huge moment. And even with later down the line with Harrison Ford, when he's in Las Vegas, there's a fake dog, and that dog,
Fake.
well, potentially fake.
Potentially. We
Potentially
don't know.
fake. You don't know because Ryan Gosling's character inquires if that dog is fake or not, and Harrison Ford says,
By fake, you mean replicant.
replicant, yeah, dog. Sorry, not a cyborg dog. This isn't Fahrenheit 451. But Harrison Ford says something really specific and notable, and he says, "I don't know. Why don't you ask him?" And so it's
Well, yeah.
and so Harrison
So
Harrison Ford is putting forward the idea of what I kind of thought of as like the whole idea of I think therefore I am. So if you think you're a person, you're a person. You don't have to prove to anybody that you are a person. If you can think about who you are, if you can think about what you are, you have sentience. You have the requirement for sentience. And I think that's what that was getting at.
Now that dog probably doesn't.
I think for the
maybe not.
audience, it was talking about for Ryan Gosling's character, because Gosling's character is looking for, concrete evidence to make him him. And meanwhile, he had the answer all along. It was like, well, do you feel like you're you? And that's the question that we all have to ask ourselves at one point. Am I me?
Purpose.
Yeah, do I have purpose? And I think that's what the kind of question that he was trying to say is, well, ask yourself, are you fake? And it's like, no. It's like, I'm Blade Runner K. I'm Joe.
And an interesting thing, this is kind of sidetracking real quick, but I remember jotting this down, but the baseline test, a little bit about that is... Interlinked. Some of that comes from, and shoot, I wish I had it pulled up. I can't remember the name of the book. It's actually the book that some of the lines come from. There's like a poem in there. There's actually this book that has a poem in it, and some of the lines come from this poem in this book, and it's actually the book it makes an appearance in the film. It's like in the first scene we see Joy, she serves him dinner, and then she like goes and picks up a book off the table, and they do this cool CG thing where like she picks up the book and a hologram version of it comes up. That book is actually a real book, and that's where some of the baseline things come from. But in that book, it's about a guy who dies and then comes back to life, and he has like a spiritual moment where he saw this giant white fountain, and he was just big moment. And then he reads the newspaper, and someone wrote an article, and someone described seeing a giant white fountain. And he was like, oh my God, I'm in on something. This is really important. I need to find this person and talk to them. Because this is a critical thing in his life now. And he goes and tracks this person down, and they talk, and the guy says, this was a clerical mistake. I meant to say it was a tall white mountain, not a fountain. And so it was a whole thing where he thought there was this big thing in his life that at the very end gets crumbled, that it wasn't true. And it's just like Kay, where Kay thinks that he is this big person, and he's not. And so it's this interesting, it's just a really small detail that they added that...
that's craftsmanship.
That's
That's amazing. I had no idea.
Exactly.
It kind of hits at... hey, life is not too nice at times. You're gonna find something that might give you purpose, and then, oh look, well, didn't work out that way, buddy.
But you can almost look at it. It doesn't have to be negative either. It's
true.
He made meaning out of something that necessarily didn't have meaning, but could be anything.
Yeah.
what he made meaning out of. It helped guide his purpose in his life, even
Right.
if it ended up not being true. And the same things with Kay. And that's kind of the decision Kay makes at the end, where even though he realizes that he's not the chosen one, if you want to say, that he kind of learns that being human, being important and being human isn't about being born. It's about the actions and the decisions you make. So at the very end of the film, he had two choices, basically. He could either help the resistance. The resistance wanted him to kill Deckard, or he could not do that. And he chose to kind of do he chose his own path. He kind of did in between, where he pretended he was dead. So he didn't kill him, and he didn't want him to get it. He kind of wanted him to meet his daughter. He chose his own path.
Right.
And that's his way of kind of becoming human.
Yeah, because he was like, you just died in the ocean.
Right.
And he's like, I couldn't find your body. And then it was in that action that with all of his strength, he still brought Deckard to his daughter. And, then he died on the steps, leaning back, looking at the snow. And I thought the snow was very interesting because just like how...
Joy.
no, not Joy. I'm talking about in the original Blade Runner.
Oh.
That all the tears will be lost. Well, and it will be lost like tears in the rain. He was being rained on, and it's a different story, and he's being snowed on. And so and at the same time, they were playing the Vangelis song that was the theme song in the ending of that part of the movie. And I think that was the big golden connector between those two, was kind of like this ending baptism again, but in a different kind of format, in that it was showing that we're now in a different stage of not only matter, going from water to snow, but a different stage in the story. And I think that was very well done symbolically, and again showing that that meditative, intelligent craftsmanship approach that Denis brings to the table when he's commanding the camera, and that was something that.
Well, hold on now. Roger Deakins is commanding the camera.
That is true. Roger Deakins commanding the camera.
No one commands the camera like Roger Deakins.
That's true. So commanding his actors, and moving the story around. But I thought that was a really good, just again, that minute detail.
I also looked at it as kind of a look back at Joy's epiphany, kind of. Maybe I shouldn't say, but like her big moment with the rain, where she kind of was like, "I'm alive. I am something.
Yeah, she's interacting with
I'm
nature.
actually a being." And I kind of felt like that was Kay, where like he had done something from his own agency, like he decided to do, like he kind of finally became human.
Right. Well, I mean,
he didn't need to be this child to be important.
Well, in the themes of interacting with nature, because like what makes man is that we're from nature, and we forget that. We become part of a city. They were all constructs of cities. They were all constructs of man's products and being made in cities and factories. And then they're brought to nature. So it's like when nature touches them, it's like their humanity is then sprung from themselves. And so I thought that was, just a really good motif that they've kept up, not only for the most recent film, but then even harkening back to the previous film as well. And then also just the atmospherics that Denis did, whereas the previous Blade Runner honestly gets a little tiring with how rainy it is and how dark it is. with this,
If
Denis,
I was going to rate these two, I thought 2049 was much
Far
better
far
than the
superior.
original Blade Runner.
Yeah.
And that might be blasphemy to a lot of people. I don't know. I just thought this one, even though this one, you look at the old one, and what was the complaint of the old one? That it was slow and it was long, and that it was kind of boring. I can kind of agree with some of those. It's like I like the film. I acknowledge that it's an incredibly important film. This new Blade Runner was longer, much long. It was like 30 minutes longer.
Mm-hmm.
And
I thought it moved still swiftly.
I felt like it felt shorter than the first one. Yeah, I mean, we could talk a long time
we could talk
about,
easily forever.
So much.
Because honestly, like a lot of what this film talks about is some stuff that's really interesting to me when we're talking about consciousness and free will and stuff. But those are rabbit holes that, for one, there's no settling those debates. It's really, like we could talk in circles for that.
Even the future of AI in our world today.
Yeah, that's a huge discussion as well. Its own right. I mean, it encompasses all of that too. It's all.
I mean, but I think that's what sci-fi is. It proffers these huge questions. I mean, even the scene of the child labor being shown of taking apart all the mechanical parts for the nickel to be used in the for the capital ships. Yeah, and it's like, okay, cool. It's child labor laws. It's like, okay,
they're orphans.
Yeah, they're all orphans too. Jesus, the large farming and everything like that was happening for like a bunch of grubs and all of that kind of stuff.
Protein.
No one's ever seen really like having jobs. Everyone's just consuming like these gnashing mouths of just like, being fed to excrete to be, commodified. It's okay. What does that say about our consumerist, capitalistic culture? Is this late stage capitalism? Is this what our wonderful like on a hill kind of dream is supposed to end?
There's also a lot to discuss about the way women are portrayed in the film. I know that was a hugely divisive thing in this film.
We didn't even talk about Robin Wright.
We didn't. We didn't talk about a lot of. We didn't even talk about the main plot points of the film. To be honest,
no.
We've literally. That's how much this film has to talk about.
It's almost 3 hours. I think it'd be kind of smug for us to think that we can encapsulate it in 45 minutes.
Honestly, there's probably a lot of films that are 3 hours that we can encapsulate, like we can talk about in 45 minutes.
Titanic, sometimes boats sink. Next.
That's what I'm saying. Like, just because it's long doesn't mean there's a lot to talk about.
That's true.
Like
it can be dense.
Yeah, this movie could have been an hour and a half, and there was a lot to talk about. I don't know. They just had a lot. Once you start getting into like philosophy and
the more questions arise.
Exactly. And that's the kind of films I like. The kind of films I like are the ones that make you think and they make you feel something. I don't want to ever come out of a movie that I'm like, yeah, that was fine, but I didn't, or like, yeah, that was good. I had fun, but it doesn't make you think anything.
Right.
Or it doesn't make you feel anything that you wouldn't have normally felt. I don't like those.
Yeah, but I mean, ultimately, go see Blade Runner if you haven't.
It's really good.
And I guess if you made it to this far, we just spoiled the shit out of it for you.
We have so much more to talk about.
Yeah,
and that's a shame.
We can revisit.
I almost don't even want to pose this question because
for it.
I don't think I can answer it myself.
Well,
but it's going to be.
You have to pose it.
What's the Anderson scale of Blade Runner 2049? For those of you who don't know, I hope you guys have listened to a couple of episodes. Anderson scale is our concrete scale of film. Like, how do we rate films? So it's a very rigid kind of scoring. It's a bell curve. So almost every film you've ever seen is a 5. It goes from 0 to 10. There's no such thing as a perfect 10. And likewise, you can't get perfect 0. Almost everything is a 5, though. So
I would say Blade Runner is an 8.5, hands down. And
it's at least an 8. It's an 8 point. It's probably an 8 to a 9 to me. I don't know. If
9 just seems. I feel like I'd have to watch it like 5 more times to call it a 9.
Yeah, and just so you guys know, we have a rule here. If this is your first episode listening, for the scale, you can only have 10 9s at a time ever in your lifetime. Like, you can't if you have 10 9s right now and you see another film and you're like, oh, that thing is a 9, I'd be like, what are you getting rid of? Because it has to beat out one of your other ones.
Yeah.
And that's just to prohibit you from constantly overrating films and like actually using an appropriate scale.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, 8.5, I think very strongly I can stand by that.
I think I could too. I think at 8.5. Honestly, it struck me a lot. And I don't put many things. I don't have 10 9s.
Yeah.
I probably have like 3.
Yeah.
Because I'm so afraid of putting something in that category.
What would you rate it?
Because it's a commitment.
For me, it's a 9. Just because the emotions that movie struck in me, just immediately how it sucked me into the film everything about it just, there was never a dull moment. There was nothing that I could look at and be like, what the hell are they doing there? Why go like this? Just all of it had me completely engrossed in it.
And there was nothing in there, even if I didn't understand it necessarily, I knew there was understanding to it.
Right.
That there was something that was behind it that I could later understand. There wasn't something that I felt like, this wasn't a, what director am I thinking of? Twin Peaks guy.
David Lynch.
This wasn't a David Lynch film that there's like, I don't understand this, but I'm pretty sure there's nothing to understand. You know, like this is just, you know, not that everything David Lynch is like that.
Right now, I get you where you're getting at.
But it's just mine. You know, this had substance to it, and it's just that I haven't thought about it enough yet.
Right.
If I don't understand something. Mm-hmm. And shoot, we're out of time. But I remember,
okay.
I remember you brought up the bees or whatever.
Yeah, do that real quick, and then I'll close out.
So an interesting thing about the bees that's kind of a cool thought is that they kind of so the scene, just to break down, it's like he goes to Las Vegas and he sees some heat map of this movement of like, oh, what is that? Something, life maybe. So they go check it out, and then he stumbles upon this one bee, and then it leads him to all these other bees. And the bee, it almost seemed super random because it's not addressed again at all. So for the sake of plot, it's like, okay, well, Harrison Ford is, you know, getting honey or something, or he's using these bees for planting other stuff. We don't know. But symbolically, it represented maybe a couple things. One, in the first Blade Runner, it talks about the wasp. There's the part of the baseline test. What does he ask her, Rachel, if a wasp landed on your hand or something?
Yeah, would you kill it?
Would you kill it or something? And that was a test, right? Mm-hmm. And she said yes, right? She would kill it. And so this is just one of the things, but bees land on his hand, and what does he do? He doesn't kill it. He doesn't do anything. So that's almost a symbol that he isn't her son, for one. The more interesting symbol, I thought, was that the bees represent basically replicants, that they are all kind of the same. It's like a hive, and that the first one that there was this one lone bee that dragged him in there was kind of the outsider. To him, it was him.
Right.
He was this outsider. And the reason I think that this was purposeful is because I also think that Wallace's headquarters was kind of a beehive. It was all yellow. It was all angular.
Like a hexagon of a honeycomb?
Yeah, it was a honeycomb. And when that one replicant gets born out of the sac, it's very...
Very honey-like, and it's
insect-like.
Yeah.
And so he's kind of the queen, and he says he has many children. He's kind of this queen bee kind of thing.
That's really good.
Wow.
Yeah,
So he has drones and everything. Yeah, that's really good. That's a really good perspective. I'm glad you shared that. That's really, really good.
Yeah, so I mean, it's not necessarily like a huge plot point, but it's just kind of a cool little imagery that's like, oh, yeah, I think that is somewhat tied in. Boom.
Boom. That sound was everybody's heads being pulled out of their collective assholes right there. Neil just blew everyone's mind. Well, in closing, definitely watch Blade Runner. If you've already seen it once, safe to say watch it again. There is always going to be more information to see. And just like at the beginning of Blade Runner, the first shot wasn't I. And know that as you watch a movie, it kind of watches you and it reflects on you as you reflect on it. And it's a growth that every single time you watch that movie, there's always something more to be gleaned from it. So that's what we're always trying to here to do, talk about and expand on. So this has been Cinepile, again, the podcast that talks about films that matter. I've been Cooper Carr.
Neil Anderson.
Nick Gibson.
And Nick Gibson. If you are listening to this right now, do remember that if you are on iTunes, writing us a review always helps us out. YouTube, you can like us. SoundCloud, hey, you can throw us a little heart. But most of all, feel free to share it with anybody else that you feel like actually cares about films. And then also special thanks to Stash Jenkins for the music, and also Jesse James. Thank you guys so much, and have a great one. We'll see you on the next time, next Friday. Bye.
Thanks, guys.